Good evening. Well, evening for me, but maybe morning or something when you're watching. But we are going to continue with Out of the Dust by Karen Hesse. And I'm being allowed to continue reading aloud through Scholastic. They've given me permission to do read aloud, so yay them. Will be posted in Google Classroom for you to watch. And if that's a problem, I will also share the link for YouTube so you can see it there. Because some of you have an easier time loading YouTube videos and for whatever reason, not classroom videos. So I'll put it in both places so you may all access it. This is a big chunk, so we will get through it. It will take a little bit, but I will stop once in a while. Some of the research topics I gave you, I'll stop and pause on and just kind of clarify those. But I'm going to start. This is Autumn, 1934, which is page 87. I don't know if you can see that, 87. It's called Hired Work. So we left off, Mom has passed away, Franklin, the baby, has passed away. Billy, Joe, and Dad are just strangers kind of in the same house. But we talked about Dad's trying to dig this well or this pond he thinks he's trying to dig. He's not really talking to anybody. And Billy Joe's trying to grieve in her own way, but they're both awkward around each other. So pay attention to how that dynamic keeps moving on. But also in the previous reading, we start getting Billy Joe talking about leaving, about going away, about being somewhere else, about being anywhere else. And at first, it seems like it's just an outpouring of her grief, right? That she just wants to escape. But keep paying attention to when those things show up and when she talks about that and how it changes a little bit throughout this next section. So this is Autumn and Winter. So Autumn 1934 and then Winter 34-35. So hired work. My father hired on at Wireless Power on Tuesday, excavating for towers. He said, I'm good at digging, and everyone who knows about our hole knows he's telling the truth. He might as well earn a couple dollars. Doesn't look good for the winter crop. Earning some cash will make him feel better. I don't think he'll drink it up. He hasn't done that since Ma. It's hard to believe I once brought in money too, even if it was just a dime now and then for playing piano. Now I can hardly stay in the same room with one, especially Ma's. Almost rain. It almost rained Saturday. The clouds hung low over the farm. The air felt thick. It smelled like rain. In town, the sidewalks got damp. That was all. Almost rained when it's been raining here. It's hard to think of, huh? This is these hands, those hands. The Wildcats started practice this week. Coach Albright used to say I could play for the team. You've got what it takes, Billy Joe. Look at the size of those hands, he'd say. Look at how tall. And I'd tell him, just because I'm tall doesn't mean I can play basketball or even that I want to. But he'd say that I should play anyway. Coach Albright didn't say anything to me about basketball this year. I haven't gotten any shorter. It's because of my hands. My father used to say, why not put those hands to good use? He doesn't say anything about those hands anymore. Only Arlie Wanderdale talks about them and how they could play piano again if only I would try. Real snow. The dust stopped and it snowed. Real snow, dreamy Christmas snow. Gentle, nothing blowing, such calm like after a fever. Wet, clinging to the earth, melting into the dirt, snow. Oh, the grass and the wheat and the cattle and the rabbits and my father will be happy. November 1934. Dance Revue. Vera Wanderdale, remember that's Arlie's wife? Vera Wanderdale is putting on a dance review at the Palace, and Arlie asked if I'd play a number with the Black Mesa Boys. It's hard, coming on Christmas. Just me and my father with no Ma and no little brother. I don't really feel like doing anything. Still, I told Arlie I would try, just because it looked like it meant a lot to him. He said he'd be dancing then, so he needed a piano player, and Mad Dog would be singing, and he knew how I'd just love to be connected with anything Mad Dog's doing. The costumes Vera ordered came all the way from the city, she said. Special, the latest cuts. I wish I could go with her to pick them up. During rehearsals, Mad Dog comes off the stage after his numbers, stands by the piano. He doesn't look at me like I'm a poor motherless thing. He doesn't stare at my deformed hands. He looks at me like I am, someone he knows. Someone named Billy Joe Kelby, and I'm grateful for that, especially considering how bad I'm playing. December 1934. Mad Dog's Tale. Mad Dog is surrounded by girls. They ask him how he got his name, and he says, "It's not because I'm wild or a crazy, untamed boy, but because 14 years ago when I was 2, I would bite anything I could catch a hold of. My mom, my brother, Doc Rice, even Reverend Bingham. So my father named me Mad Dog, and it stuck. When I go home, I ask my father if he knows Mad Dog's real name. He looks at me like I'm talking another language. Ma could have told me." December. Art exhibit. We had an art exhibit last week in the basement of the courthouse to benefit the library. Price of admission was 1 book or 10 cents. I paid 10 cents the first time, but they let me in the second and third times for free. That was awful kind since I didn't have another dime and I couldn't bring myself to hand over Ma's book of poetry from the shelf over the piano. It was really something to see the oil paintings, the watercolors, the pastels and charcoals. They were pictures of the panhandle in the old days, with the grass blowing and wolves. There was a painting of a woman getting dressed in a room of curtains, and a drawing of a railroad station with a garden out in front, and a sketch of a little girl holding an enormous cat in her lap. But now the exhibit is gone. The paintings stored away in spare rooms or locked up where no one can see them. I feel such a hunger to see such things, and such an anger because I can't. December. That's the end of the autumn section. So, winter, 1935. State tests again. Miss Freeland said our grade topped the entire state of Oklahoma on the state tests again, 24 points higher than the state average. I wish I could run home and tell Ma and see her nod and hear her say, "I knew you could." It would be enough. January. Remember last time we had the state tests poem? She wasn't happy with her mom's response. She wanted her to gush and be all excited, but now that she's gone, she's thinking how much just the "I knew you could," how much that would mean to her. Christmas dinner without the cranberry sauce. Miss Freeland was my ma at the Christmas dinner. I thought I'd be the only one without a real ma, but 2 other motherless girls came. We served turkey, chestnut dressing, sweet potatoes, and brown gravy. We made it all ourselves, and it came out pretty good. Better than the Christmas dinner I made for my father at home, where we sat at the table, silent, just the 2 of us. Being there without Ma, without the baby, wouldn't have been so bad if I just remembered the cranberry sauce. My father loved Ma's special cranberry sauce, but she never showed me how to make it. Driving the cows. Dust piles up like snow across the prairie. Dunes leaning against fences, mountains of dust pushing over barns. Joe De La Flor can't afford to feed his cows, can't afford to sell them. County Agent Dewey comes, takes the cows behind the barn and shoots them. Too hard to watch their lungs clog with dust like our chickens suffocated. Better to let the government take them than suffer the sight of their bony hides sinking down into the earth. Joe De La Flor rides the range. Come spring, he'll gather Russian thistle, pulling the plant while it's still green and young before the prickles form, before it breaks free to tumble across the plains. He gathers thistle to feed what's left of his cattle, his bone-thin cattle. Cattle he drives away from the dried-up Beaver River to where the Cimarron still runs, pushing the herd across the breaks where they might last another week, maybe 2, until it rains. So that is something I will put up a clip if I can find it where they talk about, it's a little gruesome looking, but they talk about the dust pneumonia, right? And that was one of the things you looked up maybe on the research topics. But when you breathe in all that dirt and dust and all that, and I was talking to Mr. Moose about this because when we drove around Moline and Dorr and Hopkins and Wayland, all those places to deliver your packets, there were a lot of dirt roads. And I have a cover on my truck. It's a snap-on one, and the back was closed. But when we got home and we opened the tailgate, it was covered, like the whole back of the truck was covered in dust. And you have to think about it, even when something feels like it's sealed shut, it finds its way in, right? The dirt and the dust. So even through people's mouths and animals, if you think about animals, because they're animals, they're not thinking about how to breathe carefully. They don't have shirts to put over their faces or masks or something like that, which is kind of funny in our era right now, right? Where a lot of people are wearing masks to try to protect what goes in and out of their mouths. But they didn't have that kind of stuff then. And so they would breathe in this very fine dust and dirt, animals especially, and they would just suffocate. Their lungs would so fill up with dirt that there wasn't enough space for the air, and these animals would just literally suffocate to death if they weren't starving to death. So there is a video clip on that PBS, that Out of the Dust video, where they show a little bit of some of the cattle that are left, or they listen to some of the interviews. So it's a little gruesome. So if you think that happened to animals, you'd have to think also how careful people had to be from getting sick and pneumonia and infections from things like that. So continuing, 104. First rain. Sunday night, I stretch my legs in my iron bed under the roof. I place a wet cloth over my nose to keep from breathing dust, and wipe the grime tracings from around my mouth and shiver, thinking of Ma. I am kept company by the sound of my heart drumming, restless. I tangle in the dusty sheets and send the sand flying, cursing the grit against my skin, between my teeth, under my lids, swearing I'll leave this forsaken place. I hear the first drops, like the tapping of a stranger at the door of a dream. The rain changes everything. It strokes the roof, streaking the dusty tin, ponging, like a concert of rain notes spilling from the gutters, gushing through gullies, soaking into the thirsty earth outside. Monday morning dawns, cloaked in mist. I button into my dress, slip into my sweater, and push my way off the porch, sticking my face into the fog, into the moist skin of the fog. The sound of dripping surrounds me as I walk to town. Soaked to my underwear, I can't bear to go through the schoolhouse door. I want only to stand in the rain. Monday afternoon, Joe de la Fleur brushes mud from his horse. Mr. Kincannon hires my father to move his olds out of the muck on Route 64. And later, when the clouds lift, the farmers surveying their field nod their heads as the frail stalks revive. Everyone, everything, grateful for this moment, free of the weight of dust. January. Hayden P. Nye. Hayden P. Nye died this week. I knew him to wave. He liked the way I played piano. The newspaper said when Hayden first came, he could see only grass and wild horses and wolves roaming. Then folks moved in, and sod got busted, and bushels of wheat turned the plains to gold, and Hayden P. Nye grabbed the Oklahoma panhandle in his fist and held on. By the time the railroad came in on land Hayden sold them, the buffalo and the wild horses had gone. Some years, Hayden Nye saw the sun dry up his crop, saw the grasshoppers chew it down. But then came years of rain, and the wheat thrived, and his pockets filled, and his big laugh came easy. They buried Hayden Nye on his land, busted more sod to lay down his bones. Will they sow wheat on his grave, where the buffalo once grazed? January. Just thinking of the transition, right, from one person's lifetime, of how when that gentleman came to that area, it was like wild prairie. And by the time he died, it was nothing but dirt everywhere, right? Scrubbing up dust. Walking past the Crystal Hotel, I saw Jim Martin down on his knees. He was scraping up mud that had dried to crust after the rain mixed with the dust Sunday last. When I got home, I took a good look at the steps and the porch and the windows, and I saw them with Ma's eyes and thought about how she'd been haunting me. I thought about Ma, who would have washed clothes, beaten furniture, aired rugs, scrubbed floors, down on her knees, brush in hand, breaking that mud like the farmers break sod, always watching over her shoulder for the next duster to roll in. My stubborn Ma. She'd be doing it all. With my brother Franklin to tend to, she never could stand a mess. My father doesn't notice the dried mud. At least he never tells me. Not that he tells me much of anything these days. With Ma gone, if the mud's to be busted, the job falls to me. It isn't the work I hate, the knuckle-breaking work of beating mud out of every blessed thing, but every day my fingers and hands ache so bad. I think I should just let them rest. Let the dust rest. Let the world rest. but I can't leave it rest on account of Ma haunting. January. Okay, now they're not talking about actual haunting, right? Mom's not a ghost spirit, right? Nothing like that. But the memory of what her mom would have been doing or how she would have been taking the house. And it's that guilt mixed with grief, mixed with, all of those things together. But obviously she would do the work. She doesn't mind the work, but the problem is still she has these horribly burned, scarred, not recovered hands. To do that kind of work is very painful. So, outlined by dust, 111. My father stares at me while I sit across from him at the table, while I wash dishes in the basin, my back to him. The picked and festered bits of my hands in agony. He stares at me as I empty the wash water at the roots of Ma's apple trees. He spends long days digging for the electric train folks when they can use him, or working here, nursing along the wheat, what there is of it, or digging the pond. He sings sometimes under his breath, even now, even after so much sorrow. He sings a man's song, deep with what happened to us. It doesn't swing lightly the way Ma's voice did, the way Miss Freeland's voice does, the way Mad Dog sings. My father's voice starts and stops, like a car short of gas, like an engine choked with dust. Then he clears his throat and the song starts up again. He rubs his eyes the way I do, with his palms out. Ma never did that. He wipes the milk from his upper lip, the same as me, his thumb and forefinger. Ma never did that either. We don't talk much. My father never was a talker. Ma's dying hasn't changed that. I guess he gets the sound out of him with the song he sings. I can't help thinking how it is for him without Ma. Waking up alone, only his shape left in the bed outlined by dust. He always smelled a little like her first thing in the morning when he left her in bed and went out to do the milking. She'd scuff into the kitchen a few minutes later, bleary-eyed to start breakfast. I don't think she was ever really meant for farm life. I think once she had bigger dreams, but she made herself over to fit my father. Now he smells of dust and coffee, tobacco and cows. None of the musky woman smell left that was Ma. He stares at me. Maybe he's looking for Ma. He won't find her. I look like him. I stand like him. I walk across the kitchen floor with that long-legged walk of his. I can't make myself over the way Ma did. And yet, if I could look in the mirror and see her in my face, if I could somehow know that Ma and baby Franklin lived on in me, but it can't be. I'm my father's daughter. So again, that comparison that she's so much like her dad, and in this case, she's wishing she was a little more like her mom, right? Some of you maybe look like your parents, or some people say you look more like one or the other, or like a sibling, or something like that, but she very clearly resembles dad, and that's about it. All right, President's Ball, 115. Oh, my dog's clip-clopping. All across the land, couples dancing, arm in arm, hand in hand at the birthday ball. My father puts on his best overalls. I wear my Sunday dress, the one with a white collar, and we walk to town, to the Legion Hall, to join the dance. Our feet flying, me and my father on the wooden floor, whirling to Arlie Wanderdale and the Black Mesa Boys, till 10, when Arlie stands up from the piano to announce we raised $33 for infantile paralysis, a little better than last year. And I remember last year when Ma was alive and we were crazy excited about the baby coming, and I played at the same party for Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joyce City and Arlie. Tonight, for a little while, in the bright hall, folks were almost free of the dust, almost free of debt, almost free of fields of withered wheat. Most of the night, I think I smiled, and twice my father laughed. Imagine. So it's not all bad. Sometimes there's good stuff. Lunch. No one's going hungry at school today. The government sent canned meat, rice, potatoes. The bakery sent loaves of bread, and Scotty Moore, George Null, and Willie Harkins brought in milk. Fresh, creamy milk straight from their farms. Real lunch. And then stomachs full and feeling fine for classes in the afternoon. The little ones drank themselves into white mustaches. They ate and ate until, pushing back from their desks, their stomachs round, they swore they'd never eat again. The older girls, Elizabeth and Lorraine, helped Miss Freeland cook, and Hillary and I, we served and washed, our ears ringing with the sound of satisfied children. It's February. See, another good one. They're not all terrible and sad. Guests. In our classroom this morning, we came in to find a family no one knew. They were shy, a little frightened, embarrassed. A man and his wife, pretty far along with a baby coming. A baby coming. 2 little kids and a grandma. They'd moved into our classroom during the night, an iron bed and some pasteboard boxes. That's all they had. They'd cleaned up the room first and arranged it, making a private place for themselves. I'm on the look for a job, the man said. The dust blew so mean last night, I thought to shelter my family here a while. The 2 little kids turned their big eyes to from Miss Freeland and then back to their father. I can't have my wife sleeping in a cold truck, not now, not with the baby coming so soon. Miss Freeland said they could stay as long as they wanted. February. Family school. Every day, we bring fixings for soup and put a big pot on to simmer. We share it at lunch with our guests, the family of migrants who have moved out from the dust and depression and moved into our classroom. We are careful to take only so much to eat, making sure there's enough soup left in the pot for their supper. Some of us bring in toys and clothes for the children. I found a few things of my brother's and brought them to school. Little feed sack nighties, so small, so full of hope. Franklin never wore one of the nighties Mom made him, except the one we buried him in. The man, Buddy Williams, helps out around the school, fixing windows and doors and the bad spot on the steps, cleaning up the schoolyard so it never looks so good. The grandma takes care of the children, bringing them out when their dust isn't blowing, letting them chase tumbleweeds across the field behind the school. But when the dust blows, the family sits in their little apartment inside our classroom, studying Miss Freeland's lessons right alongside us. Birth. One morning when I arrive at school, Miss Freeland says to keep the kids out, that the baby is coming, and that no one can enter the building until the birthing is done. I think about Ma, how that birth went. I keep the kids out and listen behind me, praying for the sound of a baby crying into this world, not the silence my brother brought with him. And then the cry comes. And I have to go away for a little while just to walk off the feelings. Miss Freeland rings the bell to call us in, but I'm not ready to come back yet. When I do come, I study how fine that baby girl is, how perfect, and that she's wearing a feed sack nightgown that was my brother's. February. It gives you a little bit of insight, right? That Ma died during childbirth, but baby Franklin, they call it stillborn, right? And the child is when they're born, but they're not breathing or they're not alive at that point. So the extra layer of grief, right? So if you can imagine the mental stuff that's going on with Billie Jo, that she's kind of, this family is what could have been for hers, but it's not, right? It's not her family. It's not people she knows. And her family situation ended up very different. So there's the sad chapters again, but you have to think of the emotional toll that holds on her. So when she hears the baby cry, it's the relief, like, good, they're not going to go through what I went through. But at the same time, it's grief again, is that she didn't get to have that as a family. So time to go, 124. We're not going, but the chapter. Okay. They left a couple weeks after the baby came, all of them crammed inside that rusty old truck. I ran half a mile in their dust to catch them. I didn't want to let that baby go. Wait for me, I cried, choking on the cloud that rose behind them, but they didn't hear me. They were heading west, and no one was looking back. So again, watching for those times where she's saying she wants to leave, right? It's in these grief moments. Something sweet from moonshine. We talked about this in our Zoom meeting a little bit, but the moonshine, right, during the Prohibition era, when alcohol was not allowed, and then people started making it on their own. So then you have moonshine, which is illegal because it's very, very, very strong. But you've got people who go off in the woods or try to find really hidden places to brew it themselves and then sell it under the table. So something sweet from moonshine. Ashby Derwin and his pal Rush had themselves a fine operation on the Cimarron River, where the water still runs a little, though the fish are mostly dead from the dust floating on the surface. Ashby and Rush were cooking up moonshine in their giant metal still on the bank when Sheriff Robertson caught them. He found jugs of finished whiskey, barrels and barrels of mash. He found 2 sacks of rye, and he found sugar. 1,000 pounds of sugar. These are all the ingredients. The government men took Ashby and Rush off to Enid for breaking the law, but Sheriff Robertson stayed behind, took apart the still, washed away the whiskey and the mash, and thought about that sugar. All of that sugar, 1/2 ton of sugar. Sheriff decided some should find its way into the mouths of us kids. Bake for them, Miss Freeland, he said. Bake them cakes and cookies and pies. Cook them custard and cobbler and crisp. Make them candy and taffy and apple pandowdy. Apple pandowdy. These kids, Sheriff Robertson said, ought to have something sweet to wash down their dusty milk. And so we did. So if you want to try making that, I gave you the recipe in your packet, so you can try it. I think it's pretty good, but I like apple pie, so if you like that kind of thing, you'd like it. Dreams. Each day after class lets out, each morning before it begins, I sit at the school piano and make my hands work in spite of the pain, in spite of the stiffness and scars. I make my hands play piano. I have practiced my best piece over and over till my arms throb. Because Thursday night, the Palace Theater is having a contest. Any man, woman, or child who sings, dances, reads, or plays worth a lick can climb onto that stage. Just register by 4 p.m. and give them a taste of what you can do when you're in, performing for the crowd, warming up the audience for the Hazelhurd players. I figure if I practice enough, I won't shame myself, and we sure could use the extra cash if I won. $3 first prize, $2 second, $1 third. But I don't know if I could win anything. Not anymore. It's the playing I want most, the proving I can still do it. Without Arlie making excuses, I have a hunger for more than food. I have a hunger bigger than Joyce City. I want tongues to tie and eyes to shine at me like they do at Mad Dog Craddock. Of course, they never will. Not with my hands all scarred up, looking like the earth itself, all parched and rough and cracking. But if I play right enough, maybe they would see past my hands. Maybe they could feel at ease with me again, and then maybe then I could feel at ease with myself. The competition. I suppose everyone in Joyce City and beyond, all the way to Felt and Keyes and even Guyman, came to watch the talent show at the Palace Thursday night. Backstage, we were 17 amateur acts, our wild hearts pounding, our lips sticking to our teeth, our urge to empty ourselves top and bottom, throwing up and other. We made for a sorry sight in front of the famous Hazelhurd players, but they were kind to us. They helped us with our makeup and our hair, showed us where to stand and how to bow, and the quickest route to the toilet. The audience hummed on the other side of the closed curtain. Ivy Huxford kept peeking out and giving reports of who was there and how she never saw so many seats filled in the palace, and that she didn't think they could squeeze a rattlesnake into the back even if he paid full price. The place was so packed. My father told me he'd come once chores were done. I guess he did. The Grover boys let us off. They worked a charm, Baby on sax, Jake on banjo, Ben on the clarinet. The Baker family followed, playing just like they do at home every night after dinner. They didn't look nervous at all. The tap dancers, they rattled the teeth in their jaws and the eyeballs in their skulls, their feet flying, their arms swinging, their mouths gapping. Then Sonny Lee Hallam tumbled and leaped onto the stage, sweat flying off or spotted the palace floor. Marsh Wharton struggled out, his accordion leading the way. George and Agnes Harkins ran their fingers over strings of their harps. Made you want to look up to the heavens for angels, but only scenery and lights and ropes and sandbags hung overhead. Then there was me, on piano. I went on somewhere near the backside of middle, getting more and more jittery with each act till my time came. I played Bye Bye Blackbird my own way, messing with the tempo, and the first part sounded like I just used my elbows, but the middle sounded good, and the end, I forgot I was even playing in front of the packed Palace Theater. I dropped right inside the music. Didn't feel anything till after. when the clapping started, and that's when I noticed my hands hurting straight up to my shoulders. But the applause made me forget the pain. The audience roared when I finished. They came to their feet. I got third prize, $1. Well, Mad Dog Craddock singing won second, and Ben Grover and his crazy clarinet took first. The tap dancers pouted into their mirrors, peeling off their makeup and their smiles. Bertie Jasper claimed it was all my fault she didn't win, that the judges were just being nice to a cripple. But the Harkins were kind, and the Hazelhurst players wrapped their long arms around me and said I was swell. And in the sweaty, dim chaos backstage, I ignored the pain running up and down my arms. I felt like I was part of something grand. But they had to give my ribbon and my dollar to my father because I couldn't hold anything in my hands. Tells you how painful that still is. The piano player, Arlie, says, "We're doing a show at the school in a week, Billy Joe. Come play with us." If I asked my father, he'd say yes. It's okay with him if I want to play. He didn't even know I was at the piano again till the other night. He's making some kind of effort to get on better with me now, since I did him proud at the palace. But I say no. It's too soon after the contest. It still hurts too much. Arlie doesn't understand. Just practice more, he says. You'll get it back. You can travel with us again this summer if you'd like. I don't say it hurts like the parched earth with each note. I don't say one chord in my hand scream with pain for days. I don't show him the swelling or my tears. I tell him, I'll try. At home, I sit at Ma's piano. I don't touch the keys. I don't know why. I play Stormy Weather in my mind, following the phrases in my imagination, saving strength, so that when I sit down at a piano that is not Ma's, when everyone crowds into the school for Arlie's show, no one can say that Billy Joe Kelby plays like a cripple. Munch. No good. I did play like a cripple at Arlie's show. Not that Arlie would ever say it, but my hands are no good anymore. And my playing's no good. Arlie understands, I think. He won't ask again. Snow. Had to check yesterday morning to make sure it was snow on the ground, not dust, but you can't make a dust ball packed together and slam against the side of the barn and echo across the fields. So I know it was snow. March. Night school. Let me make sure how far I'm going here. Oh, I'm close. Okay. My father thought maybe he ought to go to night school. So if the farm failed, there'd be prospects to fall back on. He's starting to sound like Ma. The farm won't fail, I tell him, as long as we get some good rain. I'm starting to sound like him. It's mostly ladies in these classes, he says. They take bookkeeping and civics and something called business English. I can't imagine him taking any of those things. But maybe he doesn't care so much about the classes. Maybe he's thinking more about the company of ladies. I'll bet none of the ladies mind spending time with my father. He's still good looking, with his strong back and his blondie red hair and his high cheeks, rugged with the wind. I shouldn't mind either. It's dinner I don't have to come up with because the ladies bring chicken and biscuits for him. I'm glad to get out of cooking. Sometimes with my hands it's hard to keep the fire, wash the pans, hold the knife, spread a little butter. But I do mind his spending time with all those biddies. I turn my back on him as he goes. I settle myself in the parlor and touch Ma's piano. My fingers leave sighs in the dust. She finally touches it though. Dust pneumonia. We've got a few more to go. 2 Fridays ago, Pete Guyman drove in with a truck full of produce. He joked with Caleb Hardley, Mr. Hardley's son, while they unloaded eggs and cream down at the store. Pete Guyman teased Caleb Hardley about the Wildcats losing to Hooker. Caleb Hardley teased Pete Guyman about his wheezy truck sucking in dust. Last Friday, Pete Guyman took ill with dust pneumonia. Nobody knew how to keep that produce truck on the road. It sat, filled with turkeys and heavy hens waiting for delivery. It sat out in front of Pete's drafty shack. It sits there still, the cream curdling, the apples going soft. Because a couple hours ago, Pete Guyman died. Mr. Hardley was already on the phone with a new produce supplier before evening. He had people in his store and no food to sell them. His boy, Calb, slammed the basketball against the side of the house until Caleb's mom yelled for him to quit. And late that night, a truck rattled up to the store with colored springs, dozens of hens, filthy eggs, and a driver with no interest whatsoever in young Caleb Hardley or his precious wildcats. So it just shows you a little bit. Lots of people were dealing with losses in different ways, right? For a teenage kid, he lost the guy who comes and talks to him about sports and stuff. So now he doesn't have that person. So it's just these constant sad reminders of the things people are losing. All right, a couple more, and then we're done. Dust storm. I never would have gone to see the show if I'd have known a storm like this would come. I didn't know when going in, but coming out, a darker night I'd never seen. I bumped into a box beside the palace door and scraped my shins, then tripped on something in my path, I don't know what. I walked into a phone pole and bruised my cheek. The first car that I met was sideways on the road, bowed down, my eyes near shut, trying to keep the dust out. I saw his headlights just before I reached them. The driver called me over, and I felt my way following his voice, and he asked me how I kept the road. I feel it with my feet, I shouted over the roaring wind. I walk along the edge, one foot on the road and one on the shoulder. And desperate to get home, he straightened out his car and straddled tires on the road and off, and slowly pulled away. I kept along. I know that there were others on the road. From time to time, I'd hear someone cry out. Their voices rose like ghosts howling in the wind. No one could see. I stopped at neighbors just to catch my breath and made my way from town out to our farm. Everyone said to stay, but I guessed my father would come out to find me if I didn't show and get himself lost in the raging dust and maybe die, and I didn't want that burden on my soul. Brown earth rained down from the sky. I couldn't catch my breath. The way the dust pressed on my chest and wouldn't stop. The dirt blew down so thick it scratched my eyes and stung my tender skin. It plugged my nose and filled inside my mouth. No matter how I pressed my lips together, the dust made muddy tracks across my tongue. But I kept on, spitting out mud, covering my mouth, clamping my nose, the dust stinging the raw and open stripes of scarring on my hands. And after some 3 hours, I made it home. Inside, I found my father's note that said he'd gone to find me, and if I should get home, to just stay put. I hollered out the front door and the back. He didn't hear. I didn't think he would. The wind took my voice and busted it into 1,000 pieces, so small the sound blew out over Ma and Franklin's grave, thinner than a sigh. I waited for my father through the night, coughing up dust, cleaning dust out of my ears, rinsing my mouth, blowing mud out of my nose. Joe De La Flor stopped by around 4 to tell me they found one boy tangled in a barbed wire fence, another smothered in a drift of dust. After Joe left, I thought of the famous Lindberghs and how their baby was killed and never came back to them, and I wondered if my father would come back. He blew in around 6 a.m. It hurt, the sight of him, brown with dirt, his eyes as red as raw meat, his feet bruised from walking in worn shoes, stepping where he couldn't see on things that bit and cut into his flesh. I tried to scare up something we could eat, but couldn't keep the table clear of dust. Everything I set down for our breakfast was covered before we took a bite. And so we chewed the grit and swallowed. And I thought of the cattle dead from mud in their lungs. And I thought of the tractor buried up to the steering wheel and Pete Guyman. And I couldn't even recognize the man sitting across from me, sagging in his chair, his red hair gray and stiff with dust, his face deep lines of dust, his teeth streaked brown with dust. I turned the plates and glasses upside down, crawled into bed, and slept. Broken promise. It rained a little everywhere, but here. That's it for that one. Motherless. If Ma could put her arm across my shoulder sometime, or stroke back my hair, or sing me to sleep, making the soft sounds, the reassuring noises that no matter how brittle and sharp life seemed, no matter how brittle and sharp she seemed, she was still my Ma who loved me. Then I think I wouldn't be so eager to go. This is the last one. Following in his steps. Hayden Parley Nye, Hayden P. Nye. Hayden Parley Nye's wife, Fonda, died today, 2 months after she lost her man. The cause of death was dust pneumonia, but I think she couldn't go on without Hayden. When Ma died, I didn't want to go on either. I don't know. I don't feel the same way now. Not exactly. Now that I see that one day comes after another, and you get through them one measure at a time, but I'd like to go. Not like Fonda Nye. I don't want to die. I just want to go away, out of the dust. That's March 1935. So that's where we end it for this week's work because we went to spring. So we are chipping away at this book pretty quickly. So work through that packet. You can do it online. You may do it on paper and attach a picture of it. But yeah, we'll talk soon.